Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Welcoming Economies webinar, Assisting Immigrant Women in Economic Inclusion. We're so excited that you're here. My name is George Zavala. I'm the Western Regional Manager at Welcoming America, and I'm based out of Austin, Texas. So for this first portion, to allow some time for people to join us as well, would you all mind answering some of the following questions in the chat? What's your name? What do you do? Where are you calling in from? And what are you most excited to learn today? And for those who were joining right as I was sharing, we're using the chat to introduce ourselves. So just add in your name, what you do, where you're calling in from, and what you're most excited to learn today. We have Lisa from Welcoming Michiana in South Bend, Indiana. We have Steve, Claudia, Sarah, Rachel Pazzo from iHelp in St. Louis, Jasmine from the Office of Racial Equity in San Jose, Ryan from the YMCA at Virginia Tech, Olivia, our teammate. Great. So during today's webinar, we will cover the following. We will do our welcome and introductions. We'll dive straight into our discussion of assisting immigrant women in economic inclusion. We'll have some time for audience Q&A. So during the panel discussion, if there's anything that comes to mind, jot it down, and we'll definitely have time at the end for you all to ask our panelists the questions that you might have. And then we'll have our wrap up, share some resources, and then talk about some of the future events that we're hosting in this webinar series. Hopefully, by the end of today's webinar, participants will leave with an enhanced awareness of the importance of addressing women's economic inclusion as part of Welcoming Economies work. We'll be provided inspiring models and hear from inspiring leaders who have had success in building inclusive economic opportunities for immigrant women, and build a constituency within the Welcoming Economies movement for more attention, programming, and ongoing support for building immigrant women's economic inclusion. So I'd like to share a little bit about Welcoming America. Welcoming America is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that leads the movement of inclusive communities becoming more prosperous by ensuring everyone belongs. We believe that all people, including immigrants, are valued contributors and vital to the success of our communities and shared future. The Welcoming Network is composed of over 300 nonprofits and local governments working to build more inclusive and welcoming communities in the United States and abroad. Led by Welcoming America, the Welcoming Network is both a network and a movement driven by the conviction that communities make better decisions when residents of all backgrounds, identities, and perspectives are meaningfully engaged. Through the network, we work to change systems and culture by providing communities the roadmap they need to create welcoming policies and share new approaches to inclusion that creates an environment where everyone can truly thrive. The Welcoming Standard captures the core of what it means to be an inclusive community. It was developed in collaboration with local governments, advocates, and diverse experts, and with input from the public at large. The Welcoming Standard provides a comprehensive roadmap for immigrant inclusion and welcoming work. The standard addresses a range of essential policies and programs from language access to hiring practices. The Welcoming Standard is organized by our framework categories, which are government and community leadership, civic engagement, equitable access, education, connected communities, economic development, and safe communities. So one area of our Welcoming Economies webinar series focuses on the economic development framework. The economic development framework is a critical part of any regional strategy for immigrant inclusion and can also be the framework for investing in immigrant inclusion work, the why, making the case. So in welcoming communities, all residents, including immigrants, can participate fully in the economy. We've rooted our webinar series in the economic development framework area of the standard because it sets benchmarks around workforce and economic development infrastructure to address the priorities and needs of immigrant residents and immigrant job seekers. It helps ensure that programs support entrepreneurship, business development, and workforce development while establishing accessibility to all residents, including immigrants. So next, I'll hand it over to Steve to share a little bit about Global Detroit.
Thanks, George. Really excited to be here. There's a picture of Gracie and I from like a decade ago or something like that. We are the partner with Welcoming America that produces the Welcoming Economies work. This partnership is almost a decade old now. We've written several publications. We co-chaired the Welcoming Economies Global Network, and we, over the last few years, have done the Welcoming Economies work, which included a peer learning model for the last 2 years, and then the Welcoming Economies webinar. This is one of a series of, I think, 8 webinars we've been putting together for the last half of this year. They're essentially monthly. I know next month we'll be talking about skilled immigrant integration, but I'm just really, we're a regional economic development initiative focusing on immigrant inclusion to build a more vibrant economy and more inclusive communities. And I will say that we believe that through the intentional inclusion of immigrants in our mainstream community economic development strategies, we will be a more prosperous place. And we've had the privilege of really working with many of you from across the country. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm just going to say one word. Gracie Xavier is going to talk about her work at Common Bond, and she wears the name Global Detroit, but make no mistake that everything she's talking about is stuff that she created at Global Detroit. She pushed our envelope in ways that we weren't thinking, and I think it not only belies Gracie's just an unfathomable amount of talent and drive, but also it speaks to the importance of having diverse staff and hiring. We got a lot of people with and Gracie has a master's degree as well. Hers just happens to be in the fine arts as opposed to some of the more traditional places we hire. And having people who really think through the community lens and the inclusive lens and live the walk and talk the talk and all that kind of stuff. And so saw opportunities where our traditional programming didn't. And just by being here today on this topic and going to hear from 3 incredible women, it makes me, looking at that standard, realize that maybe there's an equity opportunity for what the standard says. And maybe we should be asking every city, like, what specifically are you doing for women immigrants to ensure their inclusion? Because there are some very specific issues and barriers that some of the communities we serve face. So with that, I will turn it back to George to continue us today. And I'm really, this is the one webinar thus far where I'm not moderating or speaking. So I'm really excited for it.
Thanks, Steve, for that perfect segue. So we will be diving straight into our panel discussion, assisting immigrant women in economic inclusion. And we will have our wonderful moderator, Rachel Parrish, who is facilitating today's discussion. Rachel is the executive director at Welcoming America, and she's based out of Washington, D.C. Our first panelist is Claudia Arroyo. Claudia serves as the executive director of Prospera, a nonprofit community organization that works to grow Latina economic power through entrepreneurship, cooperative business ownership, and leadership development. As an immigrant woman, Claudia has faced the same kind of challenges experienced by many of the entrepreneurs in Prospera's programs and is determined to pursue change through a strength-based approach that highlights Latina strength, power, wisdom, spirit, and honesty. Our next speaker is Gracie Xavier. Gracie is the Director of Corporate and Economic Development Strategy at Global Detroit. She leads neighborhood work in Detroit's East Davison Village and Common Bond, Muslim Lady Social Club, a multi-year project bringing women from diverse cultures together through textile arts to build community and advance their economic prospects. Gracie also facilitates community arts projects with the aim to build trust, forge cross-cultural connections, and lay the groundwork for broadly shaped prosperity. A recent German Marshall Fellow, Gracie enjoys traveling the world and photographing her adventures as a citizen diplomat. And finally, we have Jinya Wang. Jinya is a social impact, community development, and creative innovator with a focus on the intersection of equity, design, and social justice work. She is the founder of Break Bread, Break Borders, a social enterprise empowering refugee women economically through the storytelling of food and culture. Jinya is an expert in sustainable global supply chain and has over a decade of extensive background in marketing for Fossil Group, JCPenney, Neiman Marcus, and Keurig Dr. Pepper. She is an acclaimed interdisciplinary artist who has shown in galleries in Dallas, Miami, and New York. Her work examines her Asian identity and diasporic immigrant experience. Jinya is an accomplished published writer and public speaker. So next, I'll just pass it over to you, Rachel, to get us started.
All right. Thank you, George. Thanks for that introduction, George and Steve. And just such a treat, really, to be here and to be facilitating this panel with a group of really accomplished, brilliant women who I know we're all looking forward to digging into these stories. I want to just touch on tug on a thread that Steve just brought up, which is around bringing a gender equity or gender equality or gender justice lens to the work. And I think it is true in the United States that we often overlook that. And I think it's a much more common practice around economic development outside the United States to be much more intentional about the inclusion or exclusion of women in design and in programming, and for really good reason. I wanted to just kick us off with a couple of stats here. I think, first of all, we're talking about this as a issue about women, but really it's an issue about prosperity for everyone. And just quoting Oxfam here, recent estimates suggest that if gender parity were achieved on a host of economic outcomes, additional global GDP would be $28 trillion by 2025. So this is really an issue that impacts all of us, and at the same time impacts all of us disparately. So in 2020, white women in the United States earned 81 cents for every dollar that a white man earns. And that same figure for American Indian, Alaska Native, Black, African American, and Hispanic women is 75 cents to 81 cents. So big gap there. We also know that the pandemic saw an increase in some of the gender disparities already in the labor market, and particularly among adults 25 or older without a formal education beyond high school. More women have left the labor force than men, and we're still playing catch up on that, I'm sure. And then we also know that a lot of the issues that impact sort of bread and butter economic development really sit outside that in the social conditions that exist in communities. And just as one example of that, we know that health insurance is a big issue for many Americans, but immigrant women in particular are significantly less likely to have health insurance coverage than US-born women. So 66.3% of immigrant women aged 18 to 64 compared to about 85% of US-born women of the same age range. So this is a multifaceted issue with many dimensions, but we know across all of them that leadership, and in this case, women's leadership, is going to be an important asset to all of us in helping apply a more thoughtful lens. So I'm excited to dig in with all of you. And I thought that maybe where we could start is with your stories, because I know that the work that you do is really driven by who you are. And I want to get a chance to hear a little bit about both your organizational mission, but also your personal mission. And Gracie, maybe we can start with you.
I won the lottery. Thank you. My name is Gracie Xavier, and I'm Haitian American. And I have to preface that by saying it wasn't my original intention to end up in this work. I think I was led to it. And once I was led to it, it felt like a natural fit. So my background is a lot in social work and in community engagement, supporting immigrant families and connecting to the resources they need in regards to school education and social support. And coming to Global Detroit has community, and recently received my MFA in community art, and coming to the economic development space was I think I had a conversation with Steve and say, I think I have imposter syndrome. I don't know if I'm the exact person to come to this work. But one of the things that I understood and Global Detroit understood is that no matter what, especially for an immigrant, the biggest challenge we face is not that we don't come in with the talent or we don't come in with the knowledge. It's we're lacking a lot of the social capital we need to connect to the resources that will help and support our families to thrive. And as we were doing this work, doing inclusive economic development in Main Street and thinking about small businesses and working in the communities that we were working in Detroit, which were predominantly immigrant-rich communities, one of the things that was a surprise to me is that we were really not connecting to any of the women in the community. And so that question had me thinking, how can we answer that? Because I do understand through myself being an immigrant, there are a lot of challenges to connecting, right? We know all of them. I'm preaching to the choir, language, transportation, depending on our culture, limits our access to the resources we need in the community. And how can we think through creatively of meeting that challenge and having the background in community art and working in community? We found out that we always connect around communal opportunities. And for everyone, it's around food, it's around music, it's around those types of atmospheres that create safe spaces where we can then have the discussion about what challenges are you facing within a community. So building trust and being intentional to have this call and response conversation was a new thing for a traditional economic development organization like Global Detroit, but I felt it has been an absolutely wonderful tool to come in from that lens. It allowed us the opportunity to now have know what the communities that we're working on needs, and now bringing those resources and connecting the women to those resources. I don't know if that's about my background, but I do believe that the reason I am here is having those trusted connectors that were in my community. I'm considered the second wave of Haitians that came to the United States. We came in by quote unquote, we were the boats people in Miami. So this wasn't the educated class that naturally can integrate into the community. So we had to have these agents that would help us to learn how to navigate the educational landscape, the social landscape, to allow us to have the ability to thrive in the United States. And I think that's the role I have come to serve at Global Detroit in doing that work, and did not even know myself. And I consider myself a highly educated person. That is a role that I could have played for my own community.
I think that's so powerful. And I saw, Claudia, you're nodding your head a lot. So maybe we can hear from you next. And I especially saw you nodding your head around imposter syndrome. So would love for you to share anything you'd like to on that note.
Yeah, so many things. I want to get together with Gracie and talk about that like more in depth, because I think that we all have, like, there's a high percentage of the imposter syndrome, especially for women. And it's so important that we are able to see who we are, embrace our story with love, with the ups and downs, if there's any downs. So for me, connecting what I do with my story is key. And that's what we do in Prospera. We call women to embrace their story. We embrace, there's no way that I just introduce myself with my title, because my title doesn't say anything. I'm the ED and what. So all the time when I meet you, any of you, I'm gonna ask you what moves your heart. And then I'm gonna find out, why do you do what you do, or why you don't do it. So what moves my heart is connected to my own story. In Prospera, we believe that we all have power. We don't empower anyone because we have power. There's like, I respect how empowerment is used, but it's like, is this temptation of giving power to somebody. And that's something that we need to change the narrative. We own power. we deserve power. We deserve to be sitting in any table where the decisions are going to be impacting our lives. And that's something that I learned because I was undocumented for 12 years. I went to school. I'm the only one who went to university in Mexico. I'm from Mexico. This is a beautiful art from Mexico, and I'm really proud, from Chiapas. And even though that I went to school and I had a hard time to get a scholarship, I was living like it was so hard to overcome all the lack of access. My mom went to she went to school at second grade, and when I went to third grade, my son just started third grade yesterday, and I was crying because I remember that when I went to third grade, my mom looked at my eyes and said, "Now you're gonna teach me because you're gonna know more than I do." She didn't know that she was my teacher all the time. And I see my mom and all the women that we work with because we have a lot of knowledge. Our lives, when the border cross you, it doesn't matter where are you coming from and why the border cross you, because we don't cross borders. It's international policies and a lot of reasons that we end up in this other side of the world. And migration is part of our essence also. Forced migration is not. So when I came to the United States, it didn't matter that I have a title. I worked, and I'm so happy and I'm so proud that I worked 12 years undocumented in the food industry, but I couldn't get the same empathy that I have just because I was able to have that experience. So in Prospera, we don't see that migration is one face. It has so many faces. And it's so important that we embrace that. And that's something that I sometimes realize is like we like to have titles and we are like, oh, immigrants are like this. I was like, it's so important that we said, in my opinion, or is what I believe. Even I'm from Mexico, I never say in Mexico we do this, because in Mexico is huge. And it's not the same somebody who was born and is work in the field, and somebody who was like in a factory in the middle of a big city. So it's so important that we acknowledge the story of every single person. We do acompañamiento, and I can talk more about it. But acompañamiento means I'm walking next to you. I'm not dictating what you do. And that's what I want to talk more later, Rachel, because that's when Steve, you say intentional inclusion, we can talk more about that, because it's about acompañamiento means like, I'm gonna walk next to you and I'm gonna listen to you. I'm gonna hear your story because you have so many things to do. So launching a business is a vehicle of transformation, and it's what we do in Prospera. It's not only about the business, it's about the whole women. How can they use businesses to reclaim their voices? Thank you very much. And I look forward to meet everyone and ask, what moves your heart?
So powerful. And I think oftentimes folks come to these webinars, I know I have as a practitioner, wanting to hear like, what's the program I need to implement? But what I'm hearing so much from both of you is this is about a mindset and an orientation and a different way of thinking about the gateways into into really a very different way of looking at the world and looking at how we do things. So Janya, I know you bring that as well, and would love to hear your mission and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rachel. And thank you, Gracie and Claudia, for sharing all those amazing stories. And it's an absolute honor to be here with Welcoming America. Well, our story began really, I grew up in Taipei, Taiwan. And when I was 13, my dad actually lost his job. And growing up originally in the South, my mom actually, much like Claudia's mother, didn't really get to finish elementary school. And there's an old Chinese saying that girls are like buckets of water that you don't really invest in. Once it's poured out, you can never get back in. And so, she was forced to work at a very young age and not able to continue education. And my parents really wanted to be able to get us that access to education. And so they moved us up north, but growing up in impoverished, it was really challenging trying to support 6 girls. And my aunt and uncle basically called from America, and they said, we're starting a Chinese version of McDonald's in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Would you all like to come and help? My parents ended up saying yes. And so 16 franchises later, my parents eyed one of the franchise locations in Dallas, Texas, and decided that it was a much bigger city for us to come to and have access to that education. And in that kitchen, which is where my mother, Mei Margaret Huang, who was the chef and very much a community leader, was transforming lives each and every day. My mom was really mindful about training other immigrants, refugees, and migrants to come and work in our kitchen and sending them on to bigger and better opportunities. And this is because our ancestors were refugees who escaped from China, from communism, to take refuge in Taiwan. And I was too young and stupid to realize this for the longest time. And it was really, truly when I lost my mother to cancer, in coping with the grief, I wanted to turn that grief into action. That's why we founded Break Bread, Break Borders, is to honor her legacy. And in continuing this, her lifelong work, Break Bread, Break Borders is an apprentice training program. It's a workforce training program in the culinary world. And we train refugee women specifically from war-torn countries to food service industry job skills like food handler's permit, food manager's license. And if they're interested in working in our catering service, if they're interested in using it as a stepping stone to go back to whatever they did before coming to America, we essentially try to remove the barriers and in order to provide that access to success. And this economic inclusion program is such a culinary immersive experience in a sense that my mom never really spoke that many languages, but food is such a universal language and a wonderful equalizer, just like art, as Gracie and I have talked about how we related on that level. I really didn't excel in math or science coming here to the US. And I remember they started the English as a learner language at school because of me. And art essentially became my universal language, and food was my mom's universal language. And the combination of that, we birthed BBBB. And the idea of training women, leveraging existing job skills. They're already amazing cooks. The challenge is the logistics and operations of running a business. And, how do we provide on-the-job training throughout the program and really have that exchange, that honest, courageous exchange with the communities. It's been an incredible experience because honestly, as a social practice artist, whatever when the communities ask us for fire, we don't bring it water. And so when we did our first pop-up, it was really interesting. The communities essentially asked us, where can we get more of this food? Where can we get more of this incredible storytelling? Where can we get this to our families, to our companies, to our workshop, to our conferences? And, and the ladies came to us and they said, Jinya, you're so cute. We don't need another beautiful community dinners. We really need jobs. And so we thought, gosh, our aunt and uncle, parents were entrepreneurs. How difficult could it be? Well, it's extremely hard, but it's also been incredibly rewarding at the same time. And so our mission is to continue our mom's legacy. And she always had these golden rules. The first is always do the right thing. And the second is to be a good neighbor. And the third is whatever you do, practice kindness and compassion every single day. And that type of leadership is what we're looking to further spread the storytelling of these lived-in experiences and really honor women and girls in this space. So thank you.
Well, first of all, so much honor to the ancestors and to your, what sounds like an amazing mother, and what a legacy you've created already. You've already kind of started pivoting us here, but I want to come back to Gracie around some of what you just brought into the conversation, which is what didn't exist in the community. What were people experiencing as a gap that you've been trying to fill, and how have you been going about doing that?
First, I want to say, Jimmy, it's so nice to have a social practice artist in this space. This is a wonderful experience because I'm usually the only one in the room. So it's nice to have in this work. So for us at Global Detroit, we were doing very focused work in several neighborhoods in Detroit that were predominantly a representative of Bangladeshi, Yemeni. We work with West African immigrants, and a lot of the focus was around small business or traditional door knocking and engaging the neighbors in the community to find out what are some of the common challenges that they were facing. And in that year, we had just recently finished our Banglatown study, and we were learning some of the challenges with the communities we're facing. And we asked ourselves, well, they're facing these challenges, but we don't really have the voices of women. We were fortunate and blessed that year to have a pot of funding sitting somewhere, and Steve was gracious enough to allow me to show up as my full self. And I think that's the most important. One of the important highlights is using the power of the talent you have in the room to be creative in the solutions that you're co-creating with community. And I use the word co-creation. That's my mantra. That's how I work. I think sometimes communities already have the solutions that they're looking for. They're just needing a facilitator, a coordinator, someone to help them connect to those resources. And I think, but we needed to know what some of those challenges are, and having the opportunity to work in a creative, outside the box way of bringing in arts, then thinking of where are there common grounds among the cultures we're working with, because the city was also implementing some planning projects in the neighborhood. And one of the things you will find out is, even though the community is rich with culture, every culture was siloed within their own unit and group. So where can we find the space to build some cross-culture connections? And now we call our work social cohesion, but really look to build some cross-culture connection and discover where there's common ground. So Common Bond came out of this idea of finding a tool to engage different women from different communities to connect, collaborate, and co-create. So Common Bond started as a pilot project in 2018, bringing women of diverse communities in Banglatown together to just do art and connect and have conversation. And through that project, we were fortunate around the women coming back to us and saying, we would love to continue this opportunity. We would love to build on this, because this is the first time we've had a women-only safe space to engage and connect. And the reason why it was important for us to work in a woman-only space was because we were working with communities that had some cultural or faith constraints. And so that's one of the things also when we are working in community is also the cultural competency. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but cultural competency is not just, oh, let me make sure that I'm making sure I have this translated in the language that we're serving, but really understanding how the culture moves in the environment that we worked in, that we had to break bread with the community. We had to actually go to Imam and ask what was the comfortable space that they would love these women to engage with. So one of the other things we learned is through this work is that engagement is slow, that it's not the traditional, let me do a focus group, let me pull out a post-it note, but really being intentional to going to the communities that we were working with. And through that, we discovered that they would love to do all these other creative opportunities. And COVID, which I said is a bittersweet moment, offered us an opportunity to expand our program, because what started as a traditional creative engagement project gave us an opportunity to learn all the challenges the women were facing based on their feedback, or just the nature of working with the women during this time, and learning that a lot of it is building the bridge to prosperity or economic opportunity. And what does that mean? And it looks different for every family and every household, and being responsive to connecting the women to those resources. So what started as just a creative art project turned into sewing, turned into a first ever English ESL class offered by the public schools, and also digital literacy, right? And then learning from the women what other resources that they're looking to connect with. And now we're in the process of working to build out entrepreneurial opportunities and employment opportunities that they were seeking. And one of the things we've learned is some of the women, because of their have childcare challenges, because they have to be home. How do we create solutions that will support the women to be able to connect to opportunities even as they are at home? So we're continuing to explore and build on our Common Bond program, but it really has taught us that, yes, sometimes we have to go to the community and listen to what their needs are. And they may already have the answers that we're looking for. It's just we would have to be intentional in co-creating and co-designing those solutions with them.
I love that. And it makes me want to come back to Claudia. You brought up the term accompaniment earlier, and I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about that. And also, same question to you. What were some of the problems or solutions that you were trying to offer that you didn't see out there in the community?
Yeah, I really feel that we are sitting like with our coffee or tea. I really feel close to each of you, and I want to continue this conversation because this is an honor. I'm really honored to be like surrounded by these powerful women, and I say it because I feel it. And thank you for sharing your stories. I feel really aligned, and that is what happens when you break isolation. And in Prospera, there's no way that we talk about launching a business, doing a business plan, and bringing all that is important, because we want to learn how to navigate the system if we are not seen and heard. And being seen and heard, that's key in order to build trust, as you both were talking. There's no way that you trust if you don't feel that you are being seen and heard in your wholeness. And I think that's the main challenge in a system that is individualistic, in a system that has been designed to use and dispose. And that's something that is not only with things, but it's with human beings. And that's the reason that migration in so many ways is happening, because we are facing a system that doesn't see the whole, and I'm talking about the in Lakesh from the Mayas. The Mayas, they talk about the in Lakesh is that you are my other self. So if something happens, and if I do something, it's going to impact you the same. So and the in Lakesh is two hands like this, and it means you are my other self and we are one. So in order that we put together programs is so important, and I really like that we are talking about building trust, we are talking about co-creation, we are talking about honor our ancestors. I'm taking a lot of notes from you too, because in Prospera is what we've been waving together, co-creating with the program participants. So it's not about what I believe or what they believe, but it's about how can we work together, honoring our collective roots. And that's something that is going, it's like a salmon, it's like going against the current, because what the main rhetoric is in the like, oh, so it's like we hear all the stories about somebody who was able to do this and that, and all the lights are over, the spotlight is, and nobody talks about how that person became to be on the top, because it's never one person. It's like we go in group, and that's collective power. And so the strategies for is like recognize the power that every single person has, and also once that you recognize your inner power, there's no way that you don't recognize that power that other people have. So in Prospera, we spotlight the importance of alternative economies. There's so many ways to do economies where we are not competing, but we are complementing, we are supporting each other. So worker-owned co-ops is one way, but we also have traditional businesses, and I say quotation marks, because when a business embraces cooperation, there's going to be many ways that women can support each other. So collective power happens in many ways in our organization. Breaking isolation, we have a community of entrepreneurs where they help each other. We have a fund that is managed collectively by all of them. We started 2 years ago with 200,000. We don't manage the money. They are the one who create a collective fund. They manage, they decide what are the needs that they want to address. Now it's growing, and we just need more money because the ideas are there. There's a health fund. There's a fund that they want to bring so they can access capital with in a way that is not extractive. So what I say is like, and to everyone who's here, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to embrace all the stories and experience and wisdom that every single woman have, and sit them on the table. Every time that we bring somebody new in Prospera, another staff, they are part of the recruitment. There's no way that we recruit people without listening to them. There's no way that we can initiate a new program without the program participants being part. So that's why I want to just close with what is intentional inclusion. And Steve, you were talking, and I want to keep talking about it since we are close. So intentional inclusion, for so many years, I like to go as a communicator. I want to go what is not, and it's not tolerance. It's not about like, for many years in the United States, it has a long story of immigration. It's not about tolerating somebody. It's appreciating. It's about being excited about learning about our stories and saying, tell me more about how your family came and started all those projects. Daniel, tell me, Gracie, how do you work in Detroit with these women? So it's appreciation, and it's not tolerance. And appreciation sounds nice, but it's not easy, because we all have power and privilege stigmas, and it's so important that we unlearn. And that's something that it takes a lot of courage to unlearn and to change the rules. And that's why I'm so excited to be here, because I think we all, in so many ways, we are ready to change the rules. Thank you.
Well, amen to that. We're all we're the salmon here, swimming up the stream. I think I'm just returning from a visit to Bosnia. My husband is originally from there, and visited a women's cooperative there. And women who are survivors of war and all sorts of things, but just seeing the beauty that they're creating in their art, and that whole idea of mutuality that you brought into the conversation. So much respect, and I think so much power in that. Danielle, I want you to respond, but I also, before you do that, just wanted to say, to everyone who's joining us today. I would love if you have a question for the panelists to pop that into the chat, and we can start bringing those questions into the conversation. So Janya, yeah, tell us a little bit about your work at a more sort of day-to-day level, and what are some of the challenges that you're trying to solve in it?
Sure. I think, when we walked into this space, there wasn't really a safe space for courageous conversations about race, gender, and all the social injustices in between. And so when we created Break Borders, we wanted to honor that space, and using food as the equalizer, the super glue, if you will, to kind of get people talking, and understanding that when we break bread together with the communities, we can break down borders at the same time. The ladies don't just cook the food, and they actually pick up the mic and share their lived-in experiences from who they were before escaping from war-torn countries, and what it's like to live as refugees abroad, what it's like coming to America, and then the experiences of, cooking with Break Borders. We're not just creating a company, we're creating a sisterhood. And the women have agency. They talk about what was really the most viable business model. We started out as a catering business because of that. When Gracie was talking about, having childcare, that is a huge challenge, not having transportation, not having childcare. And so they devised a system that, whoever's cooking will go and be at the commercial kitchen, but whoever's not will help with babysitting. And then whoever can make certain gigs at certain time of the week, they'll rotate out the schedules, and so it's all very flexible. And initially catering was our main source of revenue, but we also extended to during COVID to some consumer packaged goods of selling hummus and baba ganoush in farmers markets. And now we've kind of done the iteration into box cookies that are handmade cookies, which are very giftable for either corporate events or any, sort of gift with purchase, kind of programs around those kind of opportunities. And the thing is, the ladies we work with definitely have had to ask for permission to come and work with us. But, when their families, especially their husbands, find out that, yes, they are getting compensated, yes, they're getting paid, and they think that we're just, cooking in the kitchen, but we're really starting a revolution. And I joke that, I may not know a whole lot about cooking, but I'm really good at showing up. And so that sort of consistency builds the trust that, Claudia was talking about, the consistency of showing up and being there for the communities. And this project is built by the communities and with the communities. And the women have agency in which direction we go. And what we talk about is really this human-centered design model that we celebrate. And they're invested in this because we believe in investing in women and girls. The UN studies clearly shows this. When you invest in women, they will invest up to 90% of their income straight back into the communities and into their families. Whereas that statistics is only about 35 to 40% for men. So I'm going to make fun of the rest of the group here that y'all guys, like, you need to step it up. But but that's the thing. We know there's a clear return of investment for investing in women and girls. And so we continue to make this effort. And the problem is there has been definitely a very toxic narrative of xenophobia and intolerances of our society, of people of different skin color, people of a different gender, people of different choice and socioeconomic, all different kinds of backgrounds. And in the honor of our mom, Ming Kwang would never do that. And so how do we celebrate her spirit? Well, we continue to be inclusive, and you can't be what you can't see. And so we often have professional chefs, restaurateurs, culinary consultants who are women of color in incredibly successful spaces. So the women that we work with can see that, oh, that woman looks just like me. And if she can be successful in this space, I can too. We were talking about the imposter syndrome that is very prevalent in women of color. That's from centuries, thousands of years of trauma of people telling us we're not going to be as good. And so in refuting that and fighting against that narrative, we say, no, that's not how this works. And your recipes do matter. They can invade your country, they can start war, they can try to take away your dignity, but they will never take away your stories. And those stories and that oral history of what we travel with and what learning our histories to know which side that we want to be on, that is the part that we truly want to amplify, because Claudia's right. The voices, the power have always been there, but amplifying it and letting it out loud, that's what we need to do. And that is what we try to mitigate the problems and the challenges that we're experiencing. And the solution is, this business model is nothing new under the sun. We have all sorts of, business models that are working with refugees, immigrants, and migrants, throughout the nation and throughout the world. Our innovation is just a slight twist. We're using storytelling to not only change hearts, minds, but policy around this matter. So that's what's important.
Oh, so much to say on this, and I wish we had like hours more. And like Claudia, I hope this is a conversation that continues. We have, though, only 2 minutes. So Gracie, I'm going to give you the last word because I see your hand up.
Yes, and I think to add on to one of the things you brought in, when we are doing some of these creative work that may not seem as traditional economic development strategies because they're very qualitative in nature, the impact is quantitative, right? The impact, the return in the investment of using these creative strategies for a family, the return in the investment is tenfold by the statistics Jenya had said, and also some of the changes that we're seeing in the families that we're working with. But one thing to definitely keep in mind, that even though this is quote unquote radical and revolutionary for some families, we are going against some of the ideologies and beliefs of some of those communities, and also making sure we're creating space to bring in the husbands and in the challenges that you will face working in some of these communities when you're thinking you're bringing my wife outside of the home. So I want to really highlight that, because we had a perfect example where one of the husbands called the imam to question, was the wife really attending this opportunity? So we made sure to always have constant communication. It wasn't only with the women that we were working with, we work with the entire family so that we're alleviating some of those challenges she may face in her community that she's outside of the home. So I want to just bring that up as one of those things when we're thinking of cultural competency, that we're not just working with the women, that we're working with the entire family.
Yeah, excellent advice. Well, with that, I unfortunately am going to pass the mic in a second. But before I do that, I just truly from the bottom of my heart want to say thank you for the amazing work that you're doing and all of these pearls of wisdom. And I know that they are planting seeds with all of us. To Steve's agitating in the chat here, planting seeds with all of us that I know are going to grow into some really powerful things in coming years. So truly thank you. And over to you, George.
Yes, thank you so much, Gracie, Jenya, Claudia. It was incredible to have you just share your experiences and your stories. I know that everyone on the call wishes this was the original hour-and-a-half slot so that we could continue on with this conversation. But I encourage all of the participants to reach out to Jenya, Claudia, and Gracie if you have any additional questions, follow-up thoughts that you all have. I'm about to share my screen just to share some additional resources for everyone that exist. So if you go to our website at welcomingamerica.org, you can find our resource library, and you can find some of the some of the resources I'm about to share, like our Bridging Language and Work, our Career Pathway Programs and Equity, summary worksheet on the working group. You can also type in Guide to Hiring Immigrants from Welcome TLC. You can also find the Welcoming Economies playbook on our library. And then, like I mentioned earlier, this is a Welcoming Economies webinar series. And so we are currently planning for our September webinar, which will be on September 6th at 2 p.m. Central Time, where we will discuss skilled immigrant integration programs. And then our October webinar will be on building immigrant inclusion in your region's small business ecosystem. November will cover models of immigrant small business support. And then finally, December will close out our webinar series with financial empowerment programs for immigrants and refugees. So if you all wouldn't mind, I'm going to pop into the chat link to take a survey on how we can improve this webinar experience for you all. And we will make sure to follow up after this webinar in the next couple of days with the recording and with any supplemental materials that our panelists would like to share with us, to share with you all. So just know that that will be coming and expect that. And please keep in touch with any of us, all of us. We're always happy to field any questions you might have, connect you to any of the panelists that you all just heard from. And we really, really appreciate you all joining us today, and we hope that you all have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody. Great job.
Thanks, everyone.